Welcome, welcome. If we could have everybody come, grab a seat. If you could reserve some of the seats. We're limited on seating, so if we can reserve it for those that need it the most. I want to ask everybody to come up, and we're going to get started. I'm Derek Schweigert. I'm the Interim Community Services Director. I want to welcome you to this fine event today. So my job today is just to give some logistics for everybody. So obviously we want to welcome everybody. Make sure you grab a program in the back there. There's also food. Help yourselves. If anybody needs to use a restroom today, the Boys and Girls Club was gracious enough to open up the doors. So if you do need to use the restroom, facilities are available. Okay? All right. So what I would like to do now, it's my honor to introduce our mayor, Mayor Peter Otaki, Master of Ceremonies for today.
Thank you, Derek. I'd like to ask all of you to please rise and join me with the presentation of colors, and if I could ask you to keep standing, and we will do the Pledge of Allegiance after that. Thank you. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. And I'd also like to thank the American Legion Post 13. To, first of all, thank all of you for joining us today, this morning. I'd also like to welcome Karl Clark's family members, Karen Collins, very much appreciate your being here, and of course friends and neighbors. I'd also like to recognize my fellow council members. Let's see, Vice Mayor Ray Mueller standing over there. Council member and former Mayor Catherine Carlton, and I see recent Mayor and fellow council member Kirsten Keith is joining us. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize and express our appreciation to Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. Thank you for being here this morning. I understand a representative from Congresswoman Spear. Very much appreciate your being here, and not sure if a representative from Assemblyman Mark Berman's office has arrived or not, but I believe he's planning to be here. And I'd also like to thank very much Belle Haven Action for their work in putting together a petition to make this happen, to rename the park. And in particular, I'd like to recognize Cecilia Taylor. So today, I'm reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech 55 years ago, when he so eloquently said he hoped for a day when his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Karl courageous actions in 1945 saved the USS Aaron Ward from destruction by Japanese kamikaze planes. Despite a broken collarbone, he single-handedly put out fires on deck and an ammunition locker and dragged his fellow injured sailors to the first aid station. But his heroism was unrecognized by our country as he was judged by the color of his skin. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Eshoo for her work to right that wrong. And on a personal note, I'm very sensitive to the issue of racial injustice, particularly during that time. My father was held in a internment camp for several years during World War II, despite that he had been born in this country and was an American citizen. And he proved his loyalty as serving in the military intelligence in the U.S. Army during World War II. So this is very important to me. Today, we also honor Karl Clark for his leadership in our community. He helped start the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula, the Onetta Harris Community Center just a few blocks away, and was the go-to can-do guy in the Belle Haven neighborhood. So for his courage, leadership, and outstanding character, I'm deeply honored as mayor of Menlo Park and on behalf of the City Council and City of Menlo Park to commemorate and dedicate this park for Karl E. Clark. At this point, I'd like to invite my fellow council members, if any of you would like to come up and make a comment. You're welcome.
Hi everybody, my name's Kirsten Keith and I was the mayor of Menlo Park last year and was so pleased to help keep this process going through our Parks and Rec Commission to get this park rededicated. And I want to say thanks to everybody who's here today to honor Karl Clark, and it's just such an amazing time to be here. I know Congresswoman Eshoo's here. We were together in 2012 when Congresswoman Eshoo, I'm sure we'll talk about how hard she worked to make sure that Karl Clark received the honors that he was due and that he was not given because he was black. And I know we just talked about this Friday night and how horrible that was, that he was not given his recognition that he deserved rightfully. So thank you to Congresswoman Eshoo so much for working so hard to make that happen. And I'm really proud to be here in Menlo Park today to dedicate this park to him as well.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for coming out and for celebrating, because really what this is a celebration of a fantastic person. And I love that we take time to celebrate life and celebrate what he did and celebrate his wonderful family and the mark that he's made in our community, not only in the work he's done and during his lifetime, but through his family that continues in our town. So thank you all so much for coming out, and I'm really excited that we're doing this today.
I just wanted to thank the family for sharing the memory of your grandfather, your father, your brother with us. One of the things that I really love about this project is that it's going to be here in this park, and that kids who we heard so many stories about kids in the neighborhood who would go and meet with Mr. Clark and talk with him and how he was that person in the neighborhood. And it's a wonderful thing to know that not only will his name be here, but that there'll be a plaque be here for people to go ahead, for those kids to look at and be inspired by it. And that really moves me, that interaction. I think it's such a wonderful day to celebrate his life and his memory in that way, so close to hearing kids playing in the background today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I also wanted to take the opportunity to, so first of all, recognize Assembly Member Mark Berman, who's now arrived. Also former mayors and former and current council members Larry Moody and Donna Rutherford, are both here. Thank you for joining us. What's that? Oh, and Lisa as well. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite Belle Haven Action Group to come up and say a few words. Cecilia, if you're here. And again, thank you for all of your work on this.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for being here. Welcome to the Karl E. Clark Park in the Belle Haven neighborhood in the city of Menlo Park. Yes. First, I'd like to say thank you, a warm thank you, to our current and past mayor, to the Menlo Park City Council, to the Park and Recreation Commission, and to the various staff persons, and a special thanks to all of the community members that demonstrated their support by sending letters, signing a petition, attending meetings, and making public comment. On this beautiful day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we recognize and honor Mr. Karl E. Clark and return him to his birth name, Karl spelled with a K. I'm going to read an excerpt from his book, Pieces on My Mind, and it's, quote, William Thomas Clark and Sarah Clark were the parents of Kenneth, Keith, Catherine, and Korea. Dad and our mother decided to give us names starting with a K. When I joined the Navy, my name was put in the records with a C, and no matter how hard I tried, they would not change it back to the correct spelling. None of them thought it was important enough to correct, so I'm stuck with it until this day, unquote. And because of you and your support, we are able to return him to his birth name, Karl with a K. I am Cecilia Taylor, founder of Belle Haven Action and resident of Menlo Park. Following the memorial service for Mr. Clark back in March of 2017, it was clear that he was a person to be loved, honored, respected, and remembered, especially by the neighborhood where he worked quietly and tirelessly. This journey began, for me, with a conversation at an event that was called Afterwards. And the afterwards we had in this park, and the joke was, what's the name of this park? So we started calling it the No Name Park. So as we continued on, the idea came, and so here we are. We are also here today to celebrate the legacy and leadership of Mr. Clark that he demonstrated through his decades of military service, decades with the Postal Service here in Menlo Park, and most importantly, his lifetime commitment to the community service here where he lived. It is my hope that we as a city will continue to demonstrate for our youth the importance of community service and provide an environment where they can flourish in their neighborhoods. Mr. Clark bought his home on Hollyburn in the early 1950s. He had a deep commitment to our youth and our seniors in this community. Mr. Clark organized and assisted in the creation of the Boys and Girls Club that's right across the street from here, and also the Menlo Park Senior Center. As stated by his nephew at the Fall City Council meeting this past 2017, Mr. Clark was never too busy to talk. Even in his 80s, neighborhood children came to him to help settle their disputes. Mr. Clark was also my father's mentor, and that's what my connection is with him. Every year, Mr. Clark had a large celebration on his birthday, July 30th. And attached to this effort to have the park named after him, there is a legacy and leadership project that will be held in July. And that event will include Mr. Clark's play, and the name of that play is called At Last. We will also be honoring many trailblazers in our community who remain today, and many of you that are here, specifically Rachel Bookerstaff, Miss Cheryl Bims, Miss Juanita, I know I saw you earlier, Miss Juanita Croft. There are many trailblazers in our community, but right now the eldest of those trailblazers are here, and that is Miss Stampert, who is sitting to your left. She's been here since 1955. And her son told me a story when we were at another meeting about how she initiated having the once-a-year cleanup in the city of Menlo Park, which gives people opportunity, obviously, to clean their plates. And this was back when we still called our garbage company BFI. So that was quite a long time ago. So the naming of this park is an opportunity for inclusion on many levels: preservation of local history, encouragement of current community leaders, and encouragement of our future generation. This is a significant opportunity for us to appreciate the leaders, past and present, who are the foundation of our city. Again, deep gratitude for joining us today for this celebration. Our next speaker will be Miss Hilda.
First of all, I want to say it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I met Mr. Clark when I was 18 years old. My then husband took me over to meet him and get approval it was okay to marry me. And he said, yeah, it's okay. And his wife and son became my youngest daughter's godparents. I wrote this piece this morning before I arrived. It's called The Heart of a Hero. Mr. Clark was a man who worked hard, believed in being the best that he could be. As he journeyed through life as a young man, he entered into the Navy. He experienced hardships, prejudices, and some disappointments. However, he persevered and stayed positive, believing he could excel in spite of any obstacles thrown in his path. There were days he received very little respect, and days he received no respect, even though respect was due. And still in Mr. Clark was a desire to succeed. Look at the bright side when others could not see. He encouraged people that they were somebody, that they could succeed despite the situation. He showed strength and faith then. He would not accept failure or defeat. He was a special man that presented a man of quality, stature, courage, and strength. He was a man's man in a man's world. Decisions were made by men, especially when you were part of the government. But time has passed and things have changed. Now girls and women are considered part of this man's world. We have come a long way, and it's about time. But let's get back to Mr. Clark, the man who, in the face of danger and fellow comrades dying all around, when ships were being attacked, some sinking while men were trapped as ships disappeared beneath the water. This was a sight to behold. Mr. Clark knew many of the men on a personal level, talked with them, dined with them, and shared things of great concerns. Now he was facing danger and possible death for him and his shipmates. In spite of being injured himself, he managed to show great strength and leadership. While there was fire around, he managed to use a water hose to put out the fire that saved many lives. This was part of history of a brave soldier that stood against all odds. There were many saved and never had the opportunity to thank him. Our government took years to acknowledge him. However, today his memory will carry on in time. He shall always be remembered, never to be forgotten. I say thanks, Mr. Clark, for the legacy you left, that more people become a giant as he was, and that more people can stand when needed to do so, and rise to the occasion, stand for change, a better world. We are grateful and honored that this park on January 15, 2018 shall be named Karl Clark Park. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Mr. Clark.
Hello again. Our next speaker is going to be Lola Cluis. Miss Cluis?
Oh, wow. This is great. I have to pull my glasses off. Good morning, y'all. Good morning. Everybody. You know, I thought about and went through practice. I made about 3 speeches, and not a one of them were the same. So I decided I'm going to go for what I know and speak from my heart about Mr. Clark. And I've heard all of the comments about how he fought on the deck of that ship. And I said, wow, he continued his fight here in the community with me. I was a part of it, and I was so glad to work alongside of him. We established Bayshore Community Resource Center, and it was a human service program that served both cities, East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. It was the first agency to receive financial support from both cities. I was able to sell a dream I had about providing services to people of this community. There was a need for that. I was able to sell that dream to Karl E. Clark, and he worked by my side for 15 years to make it happen. That agency still exists, and I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to accomplish it, and that Mr. Clark was like a father to me. Although I had one, everybody knew I had one, and my relationship with my father was just as good or even better than it was with Mr. Clark. So what I'm trying to say is he was the kind of man that even though you might not have a need for him, there was a relationship that could be established. And we have all learned from that. And I am so glad to be a part of it. Mr. Clark and this community on the day that we all honor Martin Luther King. It's an event and something I will live with the rest of my life. Something that we have all done and contributed to share on this day. And I want to just, I know I only have 2 minutes, but I want to just mention some pioneers of this community. And I don't mean to leave anybody out. And as I mention the families' names, the hard workers, the people who dedicated their time and sacrifice to bring about things where life would be better for us, that's Onetta Harris, Joe Bill and Ruby Cromer, the good ones, the Brockmans, the Jacksons, and I want to let everybody in this community involvement, community activities. Things happen for us in this community. Please forgive me, because see, I'm up here and I'm nervous. I'm looking at all y'all. To call your name, I can't do that. But I love you. And
from the heart. She said she was going to.
My speech brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
And this is something that softened my heart. I just was handed this by one of the Parks and Recs Commission. I will write this letter. I will write thank you letter. Raise my head. He is a naval hero. Your friend, Jack. And on that note, I'd like to call up Miss Donna Rutherford to speak. Good morning. And I knew that I would be the next speaker. I said, after Lola said all that and brought tears to folks' eyes, I knew that was going to be a hard act to follow. To the distinguished city council members, Mayor of East Palo Alto, to our Senator Jerry Hill, to our Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, to my colleagues on the City Council of East Palo Alto, to the community, to the family. I'm happy to be here this morning. I was a little anxious about it, but today is today, and it's a good day to have this celebration for Mr. Clark on Martin Luther King Day. Two great men who fought for justice for everybody. And I can speak from my heart too, because like Hilda said, she met Mr. Clark when she was 17, and I met him about when I was 17 too. And I became friends with Karen, and we've been friends for close to 50 years now. And I did play matchmaker and introduced her to her husband, and I'm proud of that. You know, Mr. Clark, he was a big joy in my life, because when my family moved down to Menlo Park, we lived on Hollyburn, which was across the street from Karen's house. So Karen and I saw each other every day, and we went to high school together. And I would escape my house, which was a family with 11 kids at the time. And so I'm in the older set of kids, so it's always activities and lots of different things happening in the house. So I would go over to Karen's, and it'd be nice and quiet and so inviting and welcoming, and there was always a good smell coming from the kitchen. And Mr. Clark, you know, he was a great cook, great chef, and he'd always invite me to have something to eat. And, you know, I adopted Karen as my sister because it's a total of 8 sisters in my family, so she didn't have a sister, so she had plenty after that. And Mrs. Clark, quiet, beautiful person, and her brother Butch, that was my second family. And, you know, Mr. Clark had plenty of stories to tell me, and I've always enjoyed listening to my elders tell about their experiences, because I don't know that I could have withstood a lot of those injustices and, you know, things like that have occurred. But I'm so glad that he showed great courage and perseverance in his life. And when he talked about those things that happened, he was never bitter. He was very strong and bold, but never, you didn't sense that, as some of us hold on to, you know, things that don't happen in our lives that are good. He never did. We talked about a lot of things. Politics, he encouraged me when I ran for the city council, and when I was on the school board, he gave me a lot of advice. And, you know, nobody knows that he really connected with my husband, who was into cars, classic cars. And Mr. Clark had that, what was that, Mark 1 Mustang. And, you know, he treasured that car, and he always talked to my husband about any car issues, and my husband would, you know, tell him what to do, and sometimes he would go over and work on the car, and he still has a car today. His daughter kept the car.
the last thing I would like to say is he really enjoyed playing dominoes. All the guys that have come over to his house and played dominoes with him know that Mr. Clark could play dominoes. He won a lot of those games. So the last time that we actually were together, January of last year, Karen had to get together, all the guys were lined up to play dominoes. And of course, I like to play dominoes too, so I decided I'd get in line. So he beat all of them too. I got in line and it's my turn. And it was kind of quiet because you guys like to talk. And, you know, I'm quiet, so I just play my hand. Because I was a little nervous because he beat all of them. So I was winning the game and I felt really good. And so my husband said, Mr. Clark, how's that game going? And he said, well, Donna's really holding me. And so he said, you mean you're going to let Donna beat you? And I kind of thought, well, now I taught you how to play dominoes and you're going to ask him that? And so I ended up winning the game. And just at that time, it was time for us to start having the dinner. And we enjoyed that evening. And a couple of days later, Mr. Clark went into the hospital. And I went up to visit him with Karen. And I said, Mr. Clark, I said, you mean I beat you so bad at dominoes, I sent you to the hospital? And he laughed and I laughed too. But I'm so glad today that the park is being dedicated to him and his legacy. And I commend the Parks and Rec for making the recommendation. I commend the Belle Haven Action and with Cecilia and Julie's help and the community and everybody that had anything to do with making this happen. I thank you and God bless everybody, and we hope that this year will be a better year for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, and we have one more speaker, and her name is Miss Lois Reed. Good morning. What a glorious morning. I know that Karl is looking down at us and very, very pleased. My name is Lois Reed, and Mr. Clark was my best friend. My high school friend, Hilda, introduced us in 2005, and we became close friends quickly. I wrote up something about Karl, and I'd like to read it to you. Mr. Clark and his family settled in Menlo Park in the 50s. They were one of the first black families to purchase a home and reside in East Menlo Park. Karl E. Clark was the first black mailman in the city. At that time, he delivered mail on a bike. With a chuckle, he was known to comment that the physical activity probably contributed to his longevity of life. In his younger years, Mr. Clark was an active vocal participant in many important civic meetings concerning East Menlo Park. This is documented in the many news articles that I read through that he had acquired over the years. Mr. Clark played an active role in the establishment of the Girls Club and also of the Menlo Park Senior Center. The number of young adults and children that Mr. Clark mentored in Menlo Park over the years is immense. He was overjoyed, and oftentimes I was there when many of these young people would return to visit him and acknowledge to him the impact that he actually had on their lives. Upon meeting Karl, it was evident that he was an exceptional person. Nobility is synonymous with Karl E. Clark. Virtue, goodness, honor, decency, integrity, generosity, and selflessness was his forte, yet he carried this with humility. I have to say that it is a great honor for Menlo Park to name this facility after Karl E. Clark. Thank you.
Well, I hope everybody's enjoying the day. We couldn't have picked for better weather. You can thank me later. But hopefully you're enjoying the refreshments. To the city's website. And so I also want to just acknowledge a couple people. We have a number of folks from our Public Works Department that made this possible with the setup. I also want to thank from my staff, Marika Kopp, who's over here on my left-hand side. Thank her. At this time, we do want to invite a couple members from the community to come and speak. We are limited on some time, so if there is anybody from the community that we would like to speak before I invite the Kongpumen up, is there anybody who would like to speak? Okay, all right, so then move right into it. I would like it's my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Anna Eshoo to come up here and speak. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. What a beautiful day, in every sense of the word. There's so many beautiful things have been said about Karl Clark. And comments, but I too want to thank the City of Menlo Park, the members of the City Council, because their action brought us here today, and I want to thank them and acknowledge them. And to Cecilia Taylor, who is a marvelous leader. She's the founder of Belle Haven Action, and to Julie Shanson, because this effort really came up from the community. And I want to salute you for what you have done, and what a source of inspiration you are to all of us. Karl would be so proud. I also want to recognize Professor Sheila Dunnock. Sheila has, for almost 2 decades, at least 2 decades, had classes where the stories of veterans have been told. And I would not have known about Karl Clark's story were it not for Sheila Dunnock calling me to tell me about him, his bravery, his heroism, and that it had gone unrecognized. So Sheila, thank you to you. I don't know if Sheila is here, but thank you. Where is Sheila? Sheila, stand up, please. There she is. I think it is so fitting that this dedication is taking place on the birth date and the celebration in our country of Dr. Martin Luther King. I think that Karl Clark mirrored Dr. King because he was all about justice, he was all about service, he was a man that loved his country, and he loved his community, his beloved community. And today, his beloved community is saying back to him, once again, we love you and we honor you. When Dr. King came to Menlo Park, he wasn't welcome in his neighborhood. I remember when I went to his home and asked him to tell me his story. I asked him how long he'd been living in that charming home that was perfection. The garden, everything was just perfection. Could see his sense of pride in his home, in his neighborhood, in his community. But he wasn't welcome. And what he did when he served on the USS Aaron Ward, the very lives that he saved never recognized him as being good enough to sit at the same table and break bread with. And yet, when those planes, those kamikaze planes, hit a group of destroyers All of them were destroyed, with the exception of the USS Aaron Ward. And it was singularly because of Karl Clark. He was injured, broken collarbone, but he not only saved the ship, but he saved so many lives aboard. And yet, in the battle record, his name was absent. And it was purposeful. It wasn't accidental. It was purposeful that he was not worthy of recognition because of the color of his skin. Today, we see a dark underside in our country, and that racism rising up. But this community knows better. This community knows better. And so it is so important. It is so important. This today is so important because the message will ripple out, not only to the young people in this community, but all over our state and all over our nation, that we honor a man who truly was a patriot. He was an American patriot. Bitterness never entered his mind or his heart. And when I asked him, Mr. Clark, why is it, how is it that given the experiences that you've had, that you have no bitterness? And you know how he sat? He had such dignity and an inner grace about him. He said, because I wasn't raised that way. I wasn't raised that way. And because he wasn't raised that way, he raised all of us up. He raised all of us up. And so the day came when the Secretary of the United States Navy came to our congressional district, because I asked him, I said, you are the one that should place that award, that medal on his chest. He deserves that. And do you know that his uniform still fit him? This was taken the day of that ceremony. So I want you to know, my friends, elected officials, each member of the community, there isn't a position that is more powerful in our country than citizen. He showed us that. And with that legacy, that magnificent legacy of this graceful man, of this decent man, of this patriotic man, of this faith-filled man, his life is instructive to each one of us. And the children will learn when they come here to play, with everything that surrounds this park that he had his hand in, as well as helping to found the St. Vincent de Paul Society that collects for the poor. He was always at the door of the church after Mass to collect for that. So, what a life well lived. A century of goodness and decency. The day that he passed, my first thought was that Dr. King would be the first one to welcome him to heaven. And I think that they're both pleased today with what all of you have done. So thank you, and God bless all of you.
Well, thank you. So at this time, I would like to invite the Congresswoman Eshu, as well as our Mayor, Peter Otake, Karen Collins, as well as Cecilia Taylor, to join us with the park sign unveiling. And any members of the community that are here that would like to see that, I just will ask that you be careful, because there is very little room on the sidewalk and the street, frankly, in front of the sign. So be very careful, but we can have those individuals join us over at the sign, and any other members of the community that would like to. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So beautifully said.
You know what? He had a real beautiful presence.
Senator Hill?
Let's proceed. The council members.
Okay, that's
This cousin Clark's spot.
That's right.
I'll take this here.
This is big recognition.
Okay, so I'd like to invite our mayor and Kirsten talking, and I'd like to invite the other council members to join us over here at the site. Aaron Collins, Congressman Asher, to say
You're the one, I'm telling you.
proceed to
celebrate two great men, but one great man